So we'd like to start the webinar. Once again, welcome to the webinar series hosted by Graduate School of Education's Global Education Office at Kyoto University. I'm Keita Takayama, lecturer at the Global Education Office. Today will be the fifth presentation in the webinar series, The Future of Japanese Education in the Era of Diversity, hosted by the Global Education Office. Today's speaker is Dr. Tomoko Tokunaga, Associate Professor at the Institute of Human Sciences, University of Tsukuba. Theme of her talk is Japanese Education from the Perspective of Immigrant Youth, Lessons from Participatory Action Research. And we've been doing these lectures monthly. And in the previous one, we heard from Lisa Liu of Stanford University about how teachers in Taiwanese school systems are embracing the diversity of the so-called new Taiwanese children in Taiwan. Through the civil rights movement of the 1960s, multiculturalism education was established in North America, a concept known as culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally responsive pedagogy. If you look at Taiwanese educational practices from the perspective of this pedagogy, you miss the trial and error of Taiwanese teachers who try to accept diversity in various ways that are not always apparent while maintaining harmony in the classroom and in the school. And for today's speaker, Dr. Tokunaga, she has been researching many immigrant children enrolled in Japanese schools for many years. The distinctive features of Dr. Tokunaga's recent research is that she has re-examined the conventional research style in which immigrant children are regarded as research subjects, and researchers give their own interpretations to the children's experiences and narratives and present them as research findings without asking how the research findings benefit the children. The research is actively utilizing a method called Participatory Action Research, PAR. This method has been developed mainly by researchers and activists who have inherited the North American tradition of critical pedagogy. And in relation to the previous issue raised by Lisa Liu, this North American tradition of PAR has been used in a similar way in Japan. It will be interesting to see how this North American tradition of participatory action research is fused with similar research methodologies in Japan, such as those related to first-personness, to form Dr. Tokunaga's approach. Those are the things that I'm interested in. Also, in relation to the theme of this webinar series, I am sure that we will learn a lot about the challenges of Japanese-style education from the perspective of immigrant children. The presenter today, Dr. Tokunaga, received her Ph.D. from University of Maryland in the US and is currently an associate professor at the Institute of Human Sciences at the University of Tsukuba. She specializes in immigrant education, minorities in education, ethnography, and intercultural education, and has been actively publishing her research findings in both Japanese and English. She was awarded the 8th JSES Young Scholar Book Award for her single-authored work, Learning to Belong in the World, an ethnography of Asian American girls, published by Springer in 2018. And now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Tokunaga. Thank you so much, Dr. Takayama, for the introduction. I've prepared some slides for today's presentation, so I will share my screen. So thank you so much for inviting me to this very wonderful webinar series. I would like to talk about the lecture titled Japanese Education from the Perspective of Immigrant Youth, Lessons from Participatory Action Research. Here is the flow of today's talk. First, I will introduce myself and talk about my positionality. After that, I will give an overview of the theme of this seminar, which is the educational status of immigrant children and youth in Japan. Based on this, I will introduce two participatory action research projects I have been working on. The first is a participatory action research, a PAR project, in collaboration with a part-time high school, a nonprofit organization, and a university. We call these PAR. The second is a PAR project with immigrant youth and the coronavirus pandemic called YPAR. Finally, I would like to offer some important perspectives from what I have learned from these two projects that are crucial in creating a fair and inclusive education system. As Dr. Takayama introduced, I would like to add a little bit more about myself as an introduction. My areas of expertise are sociology of education, anthropology of education, and intercultural education. My research interests include educational support and empowerment of immigrant children and youth in Japan and the US. Ever since I was a university student, I have been providing educational support to immigrant children and youth growing up in Japan and the US. As a practitioner and researcher, I have been involved in their support and empowerment to this day. And recently, I have been involved in advocacy activities to promote their voices within society. I have two main research topics. The first is an ethnography of teenage immigrant women's ibasho, or place of belonging, and identity formation. Through long-term field work with immigrant women in Japan and the US, I have examined how they live between multiple countries, cultures, and languages, and how they construct their identities and homes, places. Based on my ethnographic research with Asian American high school girls, I wrote a book in English called Learning to Belong in the World. The second topic, which is what I am presenting today, is participatory action research on ibasho creation, a place of belonging creation, and empowerment for immigrant youth. People often view immigrant children and youth as having problems or deficiencies. In this context, I am taking a strengths approach that draws out and develops the inherent strengths of children. And I am researching how education and society can help children and youth who live in the midst of multiple cultures and languages to demonstrate their strengths. I would like to briefly explain my positionality, from what standpoint, why, and how I have conducted this research and practice. I have grown up moving back and forth between Japan and other countries. And I have been engaged in education and research in Japan and the US. I have been a cultural and linguistic hybrid, as Tam calls it, continually crossing borders between diverse disciplines, countries, languages, organizations, and places, and have experienced discomfort being on the margins. I have conducted my research with an emphasis on the perspectives that can be seen from the periphery. Criticism has been directed at the history of knowledge creation by those with power and the objectification and othering of minorities through research. I myself find discomfort in the objectification of immigrant children and youth as research subjects, and I am seeking ways to conduct research as a collaborative partner. In other words, to be conscious of your own privilege to actively engage with immigrant youth and practitioners, and to create knowledge and practices together. I have previously conducted ethnographic research with Filipino immigrant girls in Japan. This research was conducted in order to capture their daily world and meaning making by empathizing with them. I wondered whether it was appropriate to objectify, collect, and analyze data on these girls under the guise of speaking for them when their voices were not being heard by society. I felt that I was only consuming and using their voices. I wondered how much I understood their perspectives and how much I could incorporate them into my research given my different upbringing and living environments. Perhaps it could be considered the violence of representation. I also felt torn about anonymizing the names of the girls, as in person A, B, C, and speaking about the content of their narratives as quote unquote the expert. As I experienced such torn feelings, I began to aim for humanizing research. This means respecting the experiences and knowledge of the people who are living through the problem and building a relationship of care and dignity for both researchers and participants and transforming their consciousness through dialogue. In addition to analyzing the actual situation, I wanted to take a critical approach and aim for the transformation of unequal social structures, liberation from situations of oppression, and empowerment. I wanted to strive for an education and society that is diverse and inclusive, not only to understand the actual situation, but also to improve that of immigrant children and youth. Through my interactions with overseas researchers, I came across participatory action research, PAR, and began to explore the possibilities of research that could contribute to immigrant communities and educational practices in Japan and the US through PAR. Before introducing PAR's two projects, I would like to explain a little about the situation of immigrant children and youth in Japan. Almost 30 years have passed since the Immigration Control Act was enacted in 1990, and the number of immigrants and children of immigrants living as residents in Japanese society has increased. Although the Japanese government does not use the word immigrant, and Japan does not have a social integration policy, I believe we can call Japan a substantial immigrant society. The number of foreign children enrolled in public schools increased by 53% between 2008 and 2021. This number does not include children who have Japanese citizenship through international marriage or naturalization, so the actual number is expected to increase even more. According to a survey by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology (MEXT), the number of students enrolled in public schools who need Japanese language instruction has also increased 1.8 times over the past 10 years. By the end of December 2020, the highest number of foreign nationals under 18 in descending order of nationality were from China, Brazil, the Philippines, South Korea, and Vietnam. As you can see from these data points, immigrant children and youth living in Japan are diverse in terms of nationality, country of origin, history of arrival in Japan, native language, status of residence, religion, disability, family background, and educational background, and this diversifying is progressing even more.
Surveys conducted by MEXT also reveal educational challenges for immigrant children and youth, including the rate of out-of-school enrollment. Looking at the high school stage, educational issues for high school students and native Japanese language instruction are said to include the high school dropout rate and the rate of non-regular employment, among other things. According to a 2021 survey, the high school dropout rate for students in native Japanese language instruction is 5.5 times higher than that of all high school students, and the rate of students entering university or other higher education is only about 70% of all high school students. This point was also noted in the recommendations of the Subcommittee on Multicultural Coexistence of the Committee on Area Studies of the Science Council of Japan. Policies for foreign students in the latter stages of secondary education lag far behind those in compulsory education. In particular, the significant disparity between the national average for high school enrollment and dropout rates and that for foreign students who need Japanese language education should be promptly addressed. So what is the reason for this disparity? There are institutional and structural problems that work to their disadvantage. Factors such as language, family, economic situation, residency status with restrictions on activities, including work restrictions, peer pressure, discrimination, and prejudice complexly influence each other and create difficulties for youth. When looking at the education and society surrounding immigrant children and youth, previous studies have discussed the strong peer pressure as a characteristic of school culture, such as anonymous communitarianism and deprivation culture education, as well as the educational system and society based on the assumption of homogeneity. In a similar vein, Dr. Honda points out horizontal uniformity, or the pressure to demand a particular way of behaving or thinking from everyone, which excludes minorities and treats them negatively. Because of the persistent pressure to conform, diversity within schools and society is not recognized and is expected to be homogeneous. For minorities in particular, it can be said that there are few places in schools and society where they can feel a sense of self-acceptance, self-affirmation, and self-existence, and where they can realize a sense of stability and security. Children and young people living between multiple countries, cultures, and languages, who are the topic of this lecture, are often treated negatively because of their own differences, making it difficult for them to demonstrate their strengths. Of course, there are regions in Japan that have accumulated rich practices such as anti-discrimination education, education for Koreans living in Japan, and human rights education, so it's difficult to make a blanket statement. From here, I would like to introduce my participatory action research, PAR efforts. First, I will introduce participatory action research and youth participatory action research. So participatory action research is an epistemological challenge to the social science tradition, a perspective, orientation, and approach that goes beyond methodology. Drawing from the Southern genealogical stream that includes Paulo Freire, it opposes research that has been created by those with power and recognizes people who have been objectified as research subjects as partners in creating knowledge and practices together. In other words, we respect the local knowledge of research participants and aim to produce democratic knowledge in research. We work with community members to improve conditions and bring about social change and pursue more ethical and just research. PAR researchers work with participants at all stages of the process to take action in approaching problems. So collaboration sounds appealing in theory, but there is much debate about how collaboration is possible in the context of power relations. While being aware of the problem of power that is concealed under the name of collaboration or participation, power sharing is aimed so that power is not exercised in a repressive or coercive manner. Since the mid-90s in Japan, fields such as clinical sociology of schools and clinical sociology of education have developed, which take a clinical stance in approaching the issues within the educational field. For example, Dr. Shimizu has attempted to change the school culture at a public junior high school with a large number of foreign students, and examined the possibility of an autonomous management organization run by children as research that contributes to the field of education from a clinical perspective. So within PAR, Youth Participatory Action Research, YPAR, is a type of research conducted specifically with young people. It was developed under critical pedagogy with the aim of putting students at the center of knowledge production. It is characterized by conducting research while placing young people at the center, based on the understanding that young people themselves know best about the social issues they experience. So there are three important principles of YPAR. First is inquiry-based. Research topics are based on the needs and experiences of young people. Second is participatory. Value is placed on the knowledge and skills of young people, recognizing them as partners in the research methodology and educational process. Third is transformative. Intervenes in knowledge production and practice to improve the lives of young people and their communities. Through these efforts, we aim to respond to the needs of young people who are invisible in society, to bring their voice to society, and to empower young people. We would like to consider how we can create knowledge and practices with immigrant youth as tools for social change. The PARs of ibasho creation and empowerment of immigrant youth that we have been working on in Japan include the PAR of ibasho creation and collaboration with a part-time high school, NPO, and university that I worked on from 2015 to 2020. And another one is the PAR with immigrant youth that I worked on from 2020 to 2021 amid the coronavirus pandemic. Since last year, I have been working on a project to compile an edited book with teachers, NPO staff, and youth in order to widely disseminate our collaborative practices, which will be published by the end of this year. And I have included photos here, but we have collaborated in a variety of ways to produce promotional materials for the PAR project, including an English language paper, a website, and a book. So we have worked on these various media to deliver what we have learned from the PAR project. Next, I'd like to introduce the PAR for ibasho creation in collaboration with part-time high school, an NPO, and a university. This project was implemented at a part-time high school run by the metropolitan government, which is a 3-compartment high school with a credit system and a large number of students. And as a school located in an area with many foreign residents, it has one of the largest enrollments of students with foreign connections in Tokyo. As of 2018, when I started to be involved, there were about 80 students with foreign connections, especially those with roots in China, the Philippines, and Nepal. In order to meet the needs of the students, the school offers private lessons for students who need Japanese language instruction and has also established a committee responsible for supporting students with foreign connections. The school has been implementing a variety of initiatives. It is said that part-time high schools are a safety net, but even at this high school, there are students from economically challenged families, students who have not attended school and middle school, and others who lack connections and resources, making high school dropouts and undecided career paths a challenge. So teachers here are carefully supporting students with diverse needs. Under such circumstances, in 2015, with the aim of preventing dropouts and ibasho creation for students and empowering them, a multilingual exchange club, later called One World by the students, was launched, led by Mr. Tsunoda, the advisor to the club. The club was created through collaboration with people outside the school and an association called Kuriya, and I was invited to join the club, and we worked together to create it until the year 2020. The number and the timing of activities changed from year to year, but in most cases, we met 3 times a week for about an hour between the afternoon and evening classes with students of Filipino or Indian origin and Japanese students working together as club members. Activities included planning, exhibiting, and presenting at school cultural festivals, exchanges with foreign university students I was teaching, including discussions in English, learning multiple languages, playing games and activities. Also, workshops by artists, field trips, exchange meetings for students with connections to other countries, and university visits. As a way of collaboration based on the PAR philosophy, we placed importance on continuous dialogue with high school teachers and NPO staff, building equal relationship with them and creating trust. So I'm not like the one expert in the space, but I'm also a collaborator, collaborating with everyone in the room. And we put emphasis on building relationships and trust. And we proceeded by holding meetings on a regular basis. As a tripartite collaboration, the high school teachers mainly called on high school students and coordinated within the schools. The NPO coordinated with the high schools and universities, and they created and implemented programs. And I, as university faculty member, I created exchange programs with international students and trained students. So if you're interested, we have a report. I've posted the link here. And while involved in the creation of One World's club activities, I have been attempting to create a system that involves university students. By linking social contribution activities in the local community with learning activities, I incorporated service learning as an educational method that responds to the needs of both learners and community. At the university's International Student Center, we offered classes on multicultural coexistence in Japan and immigrant children and youth, and while students learned about related concepts and theories, each student participated in One World activities at least 3 times during the semester.
Students enrolled in this class were short-term exchange students and regular students, mainly Japanese, in the second semester of 2016. 11 students participated in the first semester of 2017, 19 students, and in the second semester of 2017, 23 students participated. So many of the international students were from immigrant backgrounds, and the program aimed to integrate research, education, and social contribution, as well as to contribute to faculty, students, and academia through synergistic effects. Due to our time constraints, I'm not going to go into details, but looking back at this One World Club activities, we were able to see the following characteristics of this place by looking at it through high school with high school teachers, NPO practitioners, university and high school students. First, it is a place of empathy and healing. A Japanese student said, "It's like home, a place with friends where I can be myself." A returnee said, "My experiences living abroad are understood here." And a student with Filipino roots said, um, "It helps a lot to have a place where I feel mentally safe in school." Um, so having this kind of place where I feel safe is nice because school can be stressful. Immigrant students are constantly immersed in a Japanese language environment and are subjected to stereotypes, prejudice, and other negative stares towards foreigners on a daily basis. This was a place where they could be surrounded by students from similar cultural and linguistic backgrounds, talk about the difficulties of learning Japanese, reminisce about their home countries, and so on. And this was with both Japanese students as well as foreign students. And it was a place of empathy and healing. On the other hand, there are some challenges and difficulties that make it challenging for some students to participate depending on the language used, students' backgrounds, and the content of the activities. There was one student of Chinese roots that said that they couldn't participate because it was in Japanese, and so whether, depending on what language is dominant, it can prevent people from participating. Second, there is respect for multiple languages and cultures. An exchange student from a university said, "Both university students and high school students felt at home in One World. Because everyone has various cultural backgrounds, I didn't feel pressure to assimilate into one culture." At this school, Japanese is the official language, and there are few times or places where multiple languages and cultures are respected. But by having such a place, even though it's a kind of limited time and space, through this club activity, diversity was being respected. Third, there's respect for students' strengths and empowerment. At One World, immigrant students also became cultural and language mediators or cultural brokers and developed their leadership skills. In many cases, immigrant students served as club presidents and vice presidents, and English and Japanese speaking students translated between Japanese and English. One student of so these kinds of support systems are talked about, and so for these immigrant students to be leaders and to lead the group, I think we were able to see that kind of support system happening. One student of Filipino roots said, "I now have more confidence in speaking English." On a related note, we can say that the program also provided an opportunity to foster a sense of self-affirmation. At school and in the local community, students often said that they lacked self-confidence because of the negative perspectives they received on their ability to speak Japanese or their academic abilities. A lot of the students would say that they lacked confidence. One student with Filipino roots explained, "If I hadn't joined One World, I probably wouldn't be able to speak as well as I do now." Uh, we could see that they could speak more of their opinions with confidence as they gradually improved their sense of self-esteem through hosting and planning events. Finally, there is also the function of forming connections inside and outside the school. Immigrant students, being new to Japan, often have limited networks in Japanese society. Through One World activities, with the help of the advisors, the students were able to connect with NPO staff, university faculty members, high school teachers, artists, and others, and were also able to connect with local resources such as career support. Of course, since only a small percentage of students participated in this club activity, there are many students who were not able to participate in this club in the first place. Nor was the school as a whole engaged in multicultural coexistence or cross-cultural understanding education. However, I believe that by creating a place within the school, even if it is small, that fosters a multilingual and cultural environment, we can have a gradual impact on the school culture starting from the bottom up. That's what I felt in the process of creating this One World Club activity. Now I'd like to go to explain the second project, which is the PAR project with immigrant youth amid the coronavirus pandemic. Why PAR? With the spread of COVID-19 in 2020, the impact on immigrant children and youth, especially those in socioeconomically vulnerable positions, has been widely discussed amid issues of guaranteeing learning rights and access to educational opportunities in many parts of the world. In Japan, too, various problems surrounding children and youth of immigrants and their families became apparent, such as difficulty in accessing information due to the Japanese language barrier, lack of learning opportunities, including Japanese language, economic difficulties due to family unemployment or suspension from work, difficulty in infection prevention due to their status as essential workers, and vulnerability to discrimination and prejudice as immigrant children and youth. At the time, media and researchers focused exclusively on the educational challenges and difficulties of immigrant children and youth amid the pandemic. It is said that in times of disaster or crisis, the emphasis is placed on the vulnerability and need for protection of the victims, and that there are fewer opportunities for children and youth to exercise their abilities and participate in the process. I believe that it is especially important for children and youth to have opportunities to participate in times of disaster. In the face of crisis and the growing discourse of vulnerability and protection, I worked on Why PAR because I felt the importance of making sense of and verbalizing lived experiences with young people. It is an attempt at empowerment that fosters youth researchers who are caring and conscious of lived experiences. I believe that immigrant youth have the right to participate in society and conduct research even in times of disaster. By doing research together, we can lead to empowerment and social change. Many of the members of this project are people who have met and built relationships through the creation of One World's club activities. The core members are the following 5 individuals: a graduate of part-time high school and a first-year vocational school student as of 2020, Paolo, who came to Japan at age 14 from the Philippines; a first-year university student, Arjun, who came to Japan at age 15 from India; a partner of NPO Katariba, which supports youth with foreign roots, Watanabe; a graduate student of the University of Tokyo Joshi, an international student from Nepal, and myself. And the diagram of the YPAR team represents the relationship we aimed for. At the center of the YPAR team are youth researchers Paolo and Arjun. YPAR has made various efforts to engage with young people from the same perspectives as much as possible, and to respect and reflect the voice of youth researchers. We have created many opportunities for dialogues and so on. In many cases, the high school and vocational school students who cooperated in the interviews also had ties to the youth researchers so that they could engage and dialogue with them on an equal footing. When it came to the university researchers or the NPO staff, they would listen to the youth researchers and participants' voices as they proceeded with the project. The YPAR project proceeded in 4 general phases. First, defining the issues. Second, data collection. Third, data analysis and reflection. And fourth, presenting findings and making actions. The arrows are one directional for clarity, but the actual project proceeded as if a spiral was being traced. The youth researchers decided on the research issues and questions by reflecting on their lives during the period of self-restraint and verbalizing what they felt. The youth's mental health and well-being were also the focus of the research, based on the fact that they were concerned about their health as their parents and their own jobs were suspended due to the state of emergency declaration, and that they continued to work part-time shifts at a convenience store despite the fear of infection. So we decided to examine how it affected the lives and health of immigrant high school and vocational school students and how they overcame the difficulties they faced. Due to time constraints, I won't go into details, but we interviewed 11 immigrant high school and vocational school students, worked together to analyze the results, and based on what we learned, we presented our findings in high school and college classes and seminars, created a website, and co-wrote reports and papers. During this time, we had weekly online meetings to move the project forward. One of my own major realizations through the YPAR project was the phase of creating interview questions. Inevitably, researchers tend to focus their research designs on the difficulties and pains of minorities, although it is understandable to focus on difficulties in order to solve problems. But the youth researchers objected to the limited focus on the difficulties and pains of immigrants.
And these are the tentatively designed questions, and they wanted half of them to be positive. So we created questions like, what did you do to cheer up yourself during the self-restraint period? After experiencing the pandemic, what did you think was meaningful in your daily life? And one of the youth researcher said that if the questions are too negative, it will just create stress. So I wanted to have these cheerful questions. And so we found there were new findings that we had time to spend more with our families. So we wouldn't be able to realize that if we didn't have these kind of questions here. So by working with the youth, I once again felt the need to shift from a deficit model that focuses on the pain and difficulties of immigrants to a strength model that looks at their strengths in educational practice, support, and research. And one of the things I have seen through the YPAR project is that immigrant children and youth have rich experiences that are not limited to difficulties or challenges. In order to create research and practice that incorporates the perspectives of the children and youth, we may be able to present a new perspective on Japanese educational research and practice by focusing on young people and conducting research together. The second is the benefits and burden for immigrant youth. Through YPAR, the young people were able to create community in the face of online college classes and feeling isolated in a life of self-restraint. And developing research skills such as interviewing could be beneficial to their college studies and maybe when they apply for jobs. There is also the advantage of participating in YPAR as an intern. So there was also the process of recognizing their own role as a researcher, bringing their voices to society. However, I believe there were some burdensome aspects. I thought about the significance of participating in YPAR amid the difficulty of balancing work and school. So I've been thinking about the meaning of participating in YPAR projects, and I think we need to devise various ways to make it less burdensome, such as offering flexible ways of involvement, changing the way of involvement depending on the time of year, and continuing daily dialogue and support. Finally, I feel it's important to take action with the people involved. In Japan, it's said that the environment for children and youth to participate in society is not well developed, and I hope that YPAR's ideas will help us to think about how we can listen to the voices of children and youth and work together to create diverse and inclusive schools. In the Japanese society, there is not the base of us listening to children and youth voices. So the YPAR team had created a website. It's here on this slide, and we invite you to visit if you're interested. So I'd like to summarize my presentation. I would like to point out the following characteristics of the places, One World and YPAR projects that we create with young people and practitioners through PAR. The voices of children and youth are respected, and there is an equal relationship with adults. Children and youth are recognized as professionals who experience issues rather than as targets to be supported, and they decide their own way of life and participate in education and society. They are respected for their multiple languages and cultures, and their mother tongue and cultures are guaranteed. There is a place where they can feel emotionally secure. And they can meet and connect with a variety of people, including supporters outside of school. I believe that this kind of place highlights something that is absent in Japanese education. In other words, I believe that Japanese education tends to force assimilation at the expense of diversity, and that it tends to focus on the weaknesses of immigrant children, thus making the strengths of immigrant children and youth invisible. Of course, in some areas, there are schools that provide generous support through cooperation between the school and the community, or provide human rights education or practice multicultural coexistence. And in part-time high school where this project took place, there's a relationship of trust between teachers and students and careful support and cooperation with NPOs. And it is necessary to recognize the diversity of schools and communities. Related to this point is the importance of humanizing immigrant children and youth. Rather than disempowering immigrant children and youth, forcing them to assimilate or seeing them as weak, the goal is to respect their inherent abilities, qualities, and skills, and to create an education and society in which their strengths can be fully utilized. As one young man of Indian roots once said, we don't have to be alone in dealing with our problems and finding solutions. We can think about them together. The question is not about how to support them, but about how to create a more diverse and inclusive education together with them, who are the experts that directly experience the challenges. On a related note, I will also discuss implications regarding research. I believe that the attempts introduced in this presentation have questioned the dichotomies in the academic field, such as researcher, research subject, expert, invoice, no voice, organization, and community, etc. I have collaborated with others to create club activities, planned and implemented the YPAR project, and am currently working on an edited book together. In the words of Dr. Kumagaya, who specializes in Tojisha Kenkyu or self-support research, it is important for both the people concerned and experts to become researchers who continue to review the values, knowledge, and skills they have inherited on a regular basis as a condition for a society that is inclusive of people placed on the margins who are often left behind. Youth researchers, again, talked about their research, the role of researchers, and their realization that they too can do research. But conducting collaborative practice and research may also be a step toward a society that is inclusive of immigrants. Additionally, although I have talked about the education of immigrant children and youth, I also feel the limitations of researching and practicing only this topic on a daily basis. There are children with diverse needs, such as children with disabilities, LGBTQ children, and children from low-income families, and there are various policies, practices, and research for each group. I think this goes along with the idea of intersectionality, but rather than discussing them separately, we need to be aware of the structural connections between the difficulties faced by diverse minorities and work across the board to eliminate discriminatory structures. I believe that creating an education system in which diversity is considered a strength will lead to a society in which each individual has a place to belong. Finally, coming back to myself, I think the process of self-reflection and introspection is once again crucial. Are we not consuming and using immigrant children and youth as a symbol of diversity? Are we promoting diversity education that is convenient for the majority? I am conducting my practice and research while reflecting on why and from what standpoint I am involved in this issue and what I am to achieve. So I think this perspective is requested for further research. So I have, these are the books that I have looked through in creating this presentation. The researches that I have introduced today was a collaborative research with a lot of people involved. I would like to thank everyone who was involved in the project. That will be all for my presentation. Thank you very much.